Hello students, welcome to class 12 physics. In this video we are going to discuss the Faraday's experiment of chapter number 6, that is electromagnetic induction. Discuss Faraday's experiment of bar magnet and coil for generation of electric current in the coil. Figure shows a coil C1 connected to a galvanometer G. When the bar magnet is pushed towards the coil, the pointer in the galvanometer G deflects. Students, as you can see over here, the coil C1, it is connected to the galvanometer G, and a bar magnet with north pole facing the coil is placed. So, because of the bar magnet, the magnetic field lines are produced around it, right? And what happens initially when the coil and this bar magnet, it is steady. The coil is already steady, but if we place this bar magnet near to it at the rest position, then the galvanometer will not show any deflection. But when this magnet is taken near to the coil, then the galvanometer will be showing the deflection. And when this bar magnet is taken away from the coil, then also the galvanometer shows the deflection, but now it will be in the reverse direction. The deflection will be in the opposite direction. So galvanometer shows deflection. That means what? What is the function of the galvanometer? The function of the galvanometer is to detect the current. That means what? When we are changing the position of this bar magnet, either we are taking towards the coil or away from the coil, then due to this change in the position of the magnet, the galvanometer shows deflection. That means the current is induced in this coil C1, right? Deflection shows what? That is the presence of the current in the coil. So when the bar magnet is moved either away or near to that coil, then the current is induced in the coil. When the north pole of a bar magnet is pushed towards the coil, the pointer in the galvanometer deflects, indicating the presence of electric current in the coil. The deflection lasts as long as the bar magnet is in motion. When the magnet is moved away from the coil, the galvanometer shows deflection in the opposite direction, which indicates the reversal of the current's direction. The galvanometer does not show any deflection when the magnet is kept stationary. So this was the experiment performed, that when the bar magnet is kept stationary, galvanometer shows no deflection. That means no current is flowing through the coil. When the bar magnet is taken towards the coil, that means when it is in motion, it comes near to the coil, then the galvanometer shows deflection. That shows the current is induced in the coil. When the bar magnet is taken away from the coil, then also the galvanometer shows deflection but is opposite direction. That shows what? The current is induced in the coil, but now its direction is opposite to that of the previous one. Moreover, when the south pole of the bar magnet is moved towards or away from the coil, the deflections in the galvanometer are opposite to that observed with the north pole for similar movements. Now the same experiment is done, but now in this case the south pole is facing the coil C1, and when the same experiments were performed, the results are same, but now the direction of the deflection is reversed. That means when we are taking the south pole near to the coil and when we are taking the bar magnet facing the south pole away from the coil, then also galvanometer shows the deflection, but in both the cases the direction of the current will be opposite. Further, the deflection and hence current is found to be larger when magnet is pushed towards or pulled away from the coil faster. So what happens if speedily you take the magnet near to the coil or speedily you take the magnet away from the coil, then the deflection will be larger and lesser, showing the greater current or the lesser current. Instead, when the bar magnet is kept fixed and the coil C1 is moved towards or away from the magnet, the same effects are observed. That means what? Instead of moving the magnet, if we keep the magnet stationary and keep this coil moving near or away from the magnet, then also the galvanometer will be showing the deflection. Conclusion. Relative motion between the magnet and the coil that is responsible for the generation of electric current in the coil. So these experiment shows the what? The relative motion of the coil or the magnet. Either you move the magnet away or towards the coil, or keep the magnet stationary and take the coil near or away from the magnet. In both the cases, the electric current is induced in the coil. When relative motion between two coils is reversed, the direction of induced current is also reversed. So, when the relative motion between two coils is reversed, direction of the induced current is also reversed. That means when you take the coils or magnet away from each other or nearer to each other, in that case also the current direction will be reversed. So students, you may note down this theory. Now let us discuss Faraday's experiment of two coils for generation of electric current in the coil. In the previous experiment we had seen that the bar magnet was taken with the coil, but here instead of the coil we are taking the another coil in which the current is passing. So in figure 2, coil C1 and C2 are shown. Coil C1 is connected with the galvanometer G as in the previous experiment, and coil C2 is connected with a battery. So in the previous experiment we had taken bar magnet, and in this experiment the bar magnet is replaced with coil 2 connected with a battery. In this case, current is induced in coil C1 due to the motion of the current carrying coil C2. The steady current in the coil C2 produces a steady magnetic field. As coil C2 is moved towards the coil C1, the galvanometer shows deflection. This indicates that electric current is induced in coil C1. When C2 is moved away, the galvanometer shows a deflection again, but this time in the opposite direction. The deflection lasts as long as coil C2 is in motion. So what happens? The coil C2 is connected with a battery so that the current is produced in the coil C2, and because of the current in the coil C2, the magnetic field is generated around that. So in the previous experiment, due to the magnetic field of the bar magnet, the current was induced in coil C1. So here instead of the magnet we are having coil. So from where will we get this magnetic field? So this magnetic field we will be getting due to the current passing through coil C2, and for that reason the battery is connected to coil C2. So now the magnetic field is produced in coil C2 due to the current passing through it. So when this coil C2 is moving towards coil C1, the galvanometer shows the deflection indicating the presence of the current. And when coil C2 is moved away from coil C1, then also galvanometer shows the deflection but in the opposite direction. That also shows the presence of the current. In the same way, if we keep the coil C2 stationary and move the coil C1 towards C2 or away from C2, in that case also the galvanometer will be showing deflection, but in both the cases, if it is moving towards the coil C2, the galvanometer will show deflection, and it is moving away from C2, then galvanometer shows the deflection in opposite direction. So in both this experiment, what had seen that when we change the magnetic field, right, these varying magnetic field will be inducing the current in the coil. When the coil C2 is kept stationary and C1 is moved, the same effects are observed. Again, it is the relative motion between the coil that induces the electric current. So in both the experiments, when we change the magnetic field, then the current is induced in the coil. But in the first experiment, the change in the magnetic field, that magnetic field produced by the bar magnet. And in the second experiment, the induced current in the coil 1 is due to change in the magnetic field, that is due to the current carrying coil C2. So when we change the magnetic field, the current is induced in the coil. This is the conclusion for the two experiments. And when we take the coil or magnet near to the another coil or away from that, then the current induced will be in the opposite direction in both the cases. So students, you may note down this theory.